All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining our FTZs Easy as 1, 2, 3 webinar today, presented to you by UPS Zone Solutions. Now, anyone on this call who is familiar with foreign trade zones is probably thinking, it's not always easy as 1, 2, 3. But our wonderful presenter, Mike, has really put together a great presentation on the fundamentals on what you need to know and consider when it comes to foreign trade zones to make it a little bit easier for all of us. So my name is Anna Garant. I am a senior marketing manager for customs brokerage and trade advisory services here at UPS Supply Chain Solutions, and I am very excited to introduce our speaker today. We are joined by Mike Essig, who is the Director of Foreign Trade Zone Strategy and Solutions at UPS. And he's worked with FTZs for quite some time. In his current role, he has responsibility over FTZ growth, as well as management of implementation, administration, and steady state FTZ business. So Mike definitely knows a thing or two about today's topic, and some of you might have seen him already teaching fundamentals at some industry conferences. So I'm very excited for him to take the stage in just a few moments. Before we let Mike take it away, I have a couple of administrative updates. So first of all, this meeting is being recorded, and it will be made available to everybody who registered after the webinar. You can also go to ups.com/supply chain and you'll find the recording there posted as well. Also, we've made sure to leave time towards the end of this call for Q&A. We want to make this interactive and make sure that your questions get answered. So we encourage participation, and you can do so by submitting your questions in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We'll monitor the Q&A. The chat is also open, but I really encourage using the Q&A so we can keep track of all your questions and make sure they get answered. And if there's anything we don't get to during this call, we might also get in touch with you after the call if you want your answer that way. So just want to make sure that all the questions get answered. Now, for legal purposes, I'm going to read the following message verbatim, and after that, we can get ready to start with today's content. So this presentation is for informational purposes only. It does not constitute legal advice. Please consult with your own legal counsel for such advice. Do not rely on this information without performing your own research. Now, with that out of the way, I'm excited to hand it over to Mike to kick us off.
Thank you, Aunt. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I see that we have a lot of representation on this call from all around the world. Very happy to be here. So today we're going to go through foreign trade zone, FTZ, easy as 1, 2, 3. Foreign trade zone, not to be confused with a free trade zone, which is its international counterpart. Foreign trade zone is specific to the U.S. Easy as 1, 2, 3. Well, FTZ has a narrative around it of being confusing, tough to get into, tough to understand where the viability is for your organization. Hopefully, through this short presentation, we can dispel some of that narrative and get you going in the right direction. In the agenda today, we're going to boil this down to absolute basics. What is an FTZ? The two basic FTZ models, where an FTZ provides value, assessing FTZ viability, and then intangible benefits, where it's really hard to put a value or price tag on. I think it's worthwhile to touch on the differences between a foreign trade zone and a bonded warehouse before we get too in the weeds here. That really comes down to flexibility. A foreign trade zone is going to provide you much more flexibility to meet your organizational and operational needs than a bonded warehouse. One, at a high level, time limit. Bonded warehouse, you only store goods for 3 years. An FTZ is unlimited. Two, being able to commingle domestic and foreign products. Bonded warehouse is only going to allow you to put foreign products in that footprint, whereas a foreign trade zone, you can commingle foreign and domestic product within the same location, within the same footprint, in the same facility. Value-added services. Bonded warehouse is very strict on what you can and can't do to product within that footprint. However, your foreign trade zone can do everything you're doing today. can repack, you can kit, you can relabel, you can manufacture, totally change the nature of a good. You can exhibit, temporary remove, you can scrap and destroy. So essentially, it's going to give you the opportunity to do everything you're doing today, but take advantage of some FTZ benefits. The last high level element, the differences between a bonded warehouse and a foreign trade zone, is that a bonded warehouse requires an individual entry per withdrawal. So as we talk entry today, entry means entering into U.S. commerce or a withdrawal from a foreign trade zone. There's also bonded warehouse entries, and they require one per shipment. Whereas in a foreign trade zone, you're doing a weekly entry process. And we'll get into that a little more as the presentation goes on. But again, foreign trade zone boils down to flexibility. A foreign trade zone is a secure physical space within the United States, but it's outside the realm of U.S. commerce. And again, to stay kind of within the flexibility theme, it can be very flexible in terms of the footprint that you choose and can support your operational needs. It could be your distribution center. It could be your entire industrial park. It could be your distribution center plus an outdoor inbound and outbound lot. Or it could be something as odd as a refrigerator or a shelf in your refrigerator inside your garage. So as long as you're getting the necessary Washington, D.C. and local CBP approvals, your footprint can be very flexible. Let's touch on two basic FTZ models. There's some creativity that could be administered here, but if we just boil this down again to basics, there's two real models that present themselves. First is the distribution / manufacturing model. This is the tried and true, basic, I would say most frequent FTZ model. Product is brought over from origin, internationally, foreign goods. Can travel via any mode of transportation, air, sea, truck, rail. It's consolidated to a foreign trade zone footprint. In this scenario, it's your distribution or manufacturing facility where goods are received and stored. From there, there's really only three final dispositions, whether you're manufacturing or not. One is you enter them into U.S. commerce. Two, it's exported to another country. And three, it's either scrapped or destroyed. It's waste, end-of-line product, product you no longer need, or product that you no longer see as valuable. In this model, I think there's some FTZ benefits worth pointing out. One is merchandise processing fee, MPF. In a non-FTZ environment, you're going to pay MPF on every entry, consumption entry, into the US, essentially every shipment. In October 1st, that MPF maximum just went up to about $615. So you're paying the government a pound of flesh for every consumption entry completed in a non-FTZ environment. Within an FTZ environment, you're on a weekly entry process. What that means is goods will come in to your FTZ via any mode of transportation. They'll move inbound to your foreign trade zone. They'll be received and stored. No MPF or duty has been paid. When these goods are sent into U.S. commerce, meaning when they're withdrawn from your FTZ, they'll be placed on a weekly entry. That weekly entry is something that we consolidate all the shipments done during your zone week. You're shipping as you do today. We virtually consolidate them into a shopping cart. And at the end of your zone week, we're going to check out and we're going to produce a weekly entry with all of your U.S. commerce, U.S. destined shipments. At that point, duty is owed. And at that point, merchandise processing fee is then owed as well. The maximum, as of October 1st, is just under $615. So in an FTZ environment, you're paying merchandise processing fee once a week versus an MPF on every consumption entry that you're doing, essentially every shipment that you're doing in a non-FTZ environment. 52 times a year versus individual shipment. It could be a lucrative opportunity. Next is duty deferment. It's cash flow. We like to say it's like pulling up to a gas station, filling your gas tank, using that gas, and then paying for it when your tank's on empty. Keep that cash flow in your back pocket until it's essentially been sold or until you decide to remove it from your zone. There's also duty elimination through re-export. So if you decide to re-export goods to another country, duties, taxes, and fees are not owed. That product is not put on your weekly entry. An in-bond is cut, it transports itself out of the United States, you save that duty entirely. The same is with scrap or destroyed product, end-of-life product that you deem no longer sellable from your perspective. You can destroy those goods within a foreign trade zone and not be liable for that duty. The gateway model. The gateway model is a little bit different, specifically tailored to air freight shipments. Multiple origins, transporting via air freight, brought in to a gateway facility, recovered from the airport and brought back to a gateway facility. Within that gateway facility could be a foreign trade zone where you can do a cross-dock operation. Typically, this adds no time in transit and can allow you to focus on MPF savings. There's no real duty deferment here. There's no export. Really, this is focused on goods traveling via air freight destined for the United States, but there's a high enough volume to where it makes sense to go after MPF savings. Cross-dock operation typically takes 45 minutes or so, and it'll allow you to embark on a weekly entry MPF process, remember, paying that 52 times a year, versus paying merchandise processing fee on every single individual air freight shipment. Those are the two basic FTZ models. Now that we've kind of talked about the basics of an FTZ and traditional FTZ savings, let's talk about business cases. Importing to manufacture, importing to export, or import for US distribution. Importing to manufacture. This is actually why the Foreign Trade Zone program, almost 100 years ago, was developed. We realized that here in the United States, we might not always have all the raw materials, all the components, but we definitely have the knowledge, know-how to manufacture and produce the finished goods. General manufacturing is turning components or raw materials into a finished product. There's an HTS shift. Your manufacturing environment may consist of foreign material and domestically sourced items. Typically, during the manufacturing process, there is a planned waste, product that's left over after wrenches are turned and a finished good is produced. If in a foreign trade zone, no duty is owed on that waste if it goes through the customs approved scrap process or destruction process. Goods manipulated in the zone, meaning wrenches are turned, putting components together to create a finished good, can undergo a tariff shift. Typically, finished goods have a lower rate than individual components. That can be a substantial savings for your organization. I think it's worth noting that 301s cannot be avoided if the product goes into U.S. commerce, but you can still take advantage of the shift in terms of the duty rate being lower on a manufactured good versus a component. Within the manufacturing environment, there's also those baseline FTZ benefits, MPF savings. You're on a weekly entry versus individually paying customs, a pound of flesh for each inbound shipment. Duty deferment, still hanging on to that cash flow. Re-export. Any of your finished goods or your components are re-exported. No duty, taxes, or fees are owed. Importing to export. So nearshoring is a hot topic lately, right? Well, a foreign trade zone can be looked at as the OG, the original nearshoring program. Really, it's bringing goods into the United States for re-export. You admit goods from origin into the United States, into your foreign trade zone. It's received, it's stored, and then eventually, when order is allocated, it's picked, packed, and shipped and sent on an inbound, 7512, so to speak, out of the country, and no duties, taxes, and fees are owed. When we think of our basic fundamental FTZ savings, merchandise processing fee, you're not putting these goods on a weekly entry. Therefore, there's no MPF to be paid. Duty deferment, well, your duty is essentially being eliminated. So there is no real deferment here. It's just being eliminated entirely. Now, some of you may have a duty drawback process within your operation. And that does take the place of this particular process. But there's a big difference between duty drawback and operating a foreign trade zone when it comes to re-export. The duty drawback, you're having to outlay those funds to customs and then knock on customs door, prove that you imported the product, prove that you re-exported the product, and prove that you're owed duty. We all know getting funds back or money back from the government is never an easy process, and it's never a fast process. You take a year plus to get that money back. Within a foreign trade zone, you keep it in your back pocket. You're not outlaying those funds to customs. You're not paying them in the first place. So FTZ, when you're importing to export, could be a definite benefit for your organization and can replace any duty drawback programs that you're embarking on today. Import for U.S. distribution. So I think it's important to go through a few things here. Even if you're not exporting, maybe even if you're not doing any sort of manufacturing or tariff shift, there could still be some FTZ specific value adds. One is duty deferment. So bringing goods in, not outlaying duty to customs until you're essentially entering them into U.S. commerce. Most of the time, if you're withdrawing them from your zone, it's because an end line customer, consignee, has bought or purchased that product. So again, you're not outlaying duty funds until you are getting paid for the product that's leaving your zone. If we think of this in basic terms, if your organization has, let's say, 2 inventory turns a year and you're paying $5 million annually on duty, it's essentially over $2 million of cash flow that you keep in your back pocket. That can be used to reinvest elsewhere, or can sit in the bank and gain interest. Merchandise processing fee savings. Again, if you have a lot of inbound shipments, a high quantity of inbound shipments, this may be a bottom line savings to consider. If you're paying MPF once a week versus MPF on each individual inbound shipment. Time to market is another intangible, invaluable tool that an FTZ can provide, or a benefit that FTZ can provide. Let's say you're a healthcare organization and you want to bring in goods that are non-FDA approved yet. You can admit those goods into a foreign trade zone that's located within the United States. Once FDA is approved, you can distribute those immediately because the product is already stateside. Also, for the healthcare organizations out there, you don't need to communicate intent at time of admission. You may be still developing your product. You might not be sure of the actual intent or ready to share the actual intent of your product just yet. You don't need to communicate intent of your healthcare goods that are subject to FDA at the time of admission to an FTZ, only at the time of withdrawal. Let's say that you are a company that has a high level of seasonality, tech company, retail company that relies on new product launches or seasonality of sales. You may want to keep your origin international manufacturing plant rolling by bringing goods into the United States well before you will actually launch that new product, or well before the seasonality of your goods plan to sell. You'll be able to keep that duty deferment, that cash flow in your back pocket until you're ready to distribute those goods. Getting back into our theme here of easy as 1, 2, 3, it's worth asking ourselves a few questions. One, is it feasible from a cost perspective? Is the juice worth the squeeze? Two, does it make operational sense? And three, do you have organizational support within your company and the resources to implement a foreign trade zone? Some things to consider about feasibility. One, what are the cost savings? So we touched on it a little bit here in the previous slides. MPF savings, duty deferment, re-export duty elimination, scrap duty elimination, reduction of brokerage fees. So remember, you're only doing one weekly entry. You're not doing individual consumption entries per imported shipment. Adding all of those, itemizing, adding all of those elements up should be able to outline your potential FTZ savings. Inverted tariff if you're a manufacturing organization. What are the initial setup and ongoing costs? Implementing a foreign trade zone is more than just getting Washington, D.C. designation approval and local customs activation approval. There are IT and system connectivity elements that are required. And there's ongoing support within a foreign trade zone for administration. Once you consider your potential savings and the initial setup costs plus ongoing administration requirements, it should be easy to identify if the juice is worth the squeeze. Is it worth moving forward? In my experience, I don't recommend anyone moving forward unless there's a solid $150,000 to $200,000 annual savings. Moving on, some additional things to consider from an operational perspective. What is the type of merchandise you're importing? Is it subject to FDA, other PGAs? Is it components or is it finished goods? What are the duty rate on the product you're importing? Is it duty free or is it a high duty rate on things like footwear? What activities are being completed within your operation today that you'd like to complete within the zone? Are you going to manufacture? Is it just distribution? Are you only looking at an air freight MPF play? Inventory accuracy. So to get an FTZ designated and activated, you have to submit an application to Washington, D.C. Once designated, you then submit an application to your local customs port. The job of local customs, customs in general, one of the main jobs is to protect the revenue of the United States. A foreign trade zone represents revenue risk for customs. Once a facility is activated, customs can come in and audit. And one of the things they would audit for is inventory accuracy. They want to make sure what you're claiming is in the facility actually matches what you physically have. Remember, they're there to protect the revenue of the United States, and duty is a big revenue driver for the U.S. Next is activated footprint. Do you need an entire industrial park, multiple facilities? Do you only need a small area of the facility? The entire facility? Do you need to activate the outdoor space as well? Those are some things to consider. And last, do you have company resources to support? One is, do you have an executive sponsor? Is there someone within your organization that's going to help put the juice behind this project to cross the finish line? Next, IT systems and personnel. As I mentioned in the previous slide, foreign trade zone is more than just physical designation and activation. It's more so an IT implementation. It's taking your current existing warehouse management system and it's connecting it to a foreign trade zone software or an ICRS, inventory control and record keeping system. They are typically connected via EDI feeds for invoices and manifests, for everyday receipts and shipments, cycle count adjustments, whether positive or negative. Those are going to be communicated from your WMS to the FTZ software. The FTZ software is there to track things that a normal warehouse management system wouldn't. HTS, duty rate, country of origin, individual inventory layers, things of that nature. So do you have the resources within your company to develop those necessary IT feeds? Or is it something you need to outsource? The next is, does your organization have internal compliance expertise? Not just the understanding of FTZ regulations, but how it applies to your day-to-day operation, and then how to work within the FTZ software to do the day-to-day administrative tasks, creating 214s, getting authorization and concurrence on those 214s, the differences between direct delivery and standard admission, creating estimates, filing or creating main entry files to your broker of choice, making sure inventory is balanced, document retention, and being able to walk customs through the life cycle of your product if and when they come in for an audit. Is that something your company currently has? Or again, is that something you may need to outsource? Some intangible benefits of an FTZ. One is compliance. So typically, in our experience, the FTZs that we administer or have implemented or involved with, there is a heightened sense of attention, and that drives additional compliance, right? It would be like doing your taxes with the IRS looking over your shoulder. There is an additional level of scrutiny there. Therefore, organically, the operation is more compliant. There's another set of eyes, whether internally, your compliance team watching the ICRS versus warehouse management system balancing on a daily basis, whether it's an outsourced administration company that you use, or whether it's customs coming in once a year to do an audit. Typically, a foreign trade zone, because of that heightened level of compliance requirement, tends to be more compliant. An example would be inventory accuracy within a foreign trade zone is typically significantly better than in a non-FTZ. It's not necessarily because day-to-day processes are different. It's just because there's that heightened level of compliance that the operators, management, and any outsourced administration, FTZ administration that you might have, are aware of. Next is security. We touched on it a little bit, but local customs goal, or customs in general's goal, is to protect the revenue of the United States. When they come in to do a facility walk prior to activating you, they're going to ensure your facility meets their security needs. Now, a lot of that's going to be based on, one, the customs port. Each port has different interpretations of secure. And two, it's going to be what product you're housing within your facility. They're going to look for things like internal and external security cameras, maybe metal detectors. They're going to look at your vendor and visitor processes. If you want an exterior activated space, they might require you to fence in your property. They're going to look at your exterior lighting. They're going to want to make sure you have background checks for your employees. All of those elements are going to add to the security of your facility. So typically, our foreign trade zone sites are more secure than non-FTZ sites. If you are already CT-PAT, you check 90% of those boxes already. And last but not least is supply chain velocity. We touched on it a little bit. Speed to market. That's an intangible benefit. Being able to bring goods into the United States that are not FDA approved. And once they are FDA approved, having them already stateside for quick distribution. Any new product launches or seasonality, being able to keep your international manufacturing facilities unencumbered, keep them flowing by bringing goods in as they are finished to the United States without having to outlay that duty, having those goods already here, not reliance on just in time transportation. Supply chain velocity is an intangible benefit of foreign trade zone. So I know we covered a lot in a very short amount of time. We're going to get to Q&A here in a minute, but I hope that the few slides that we covered really work to dispel some of the challenging narratives around an FTZ. It really does not need to be as confusing as some make it. The very first step, typically, when we're evaluating foreign trade zone is a feasibility review. You heard me say it before, is the juice worth the squeeze? Foreign trade zone's typically not worth it unless it provides you value. First step in that path, with a little bit of information from you, is we can take that information, plug it into our feasibility tool, and itemize all of your potential foreign trade zone savings. We touched on them. Merchandise processing fee, duty deferment, re-export duty elimination, scrap, inverted tariff, brokerage fees being reduced. All of those items packaged together, along with the intangible benefits we covered, we can overlay general FTZ costs as well to show you that bottom line savings and what a foreign trade zone can do for your organization as a whole.
Awesome.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Michael. At least for me, I learned a lot, and you did a great job simplifying very complex topics. And I want to say thank you to everybody in the audience. There's been a lot of great questions submitted, actually. So I'll start asking you, Michael.
Sure.
First question was about the footprint of an FTZ. That can it be increased or decreased? So the example was, if you have a warehouse, that half of it is a bonded facility and half is an FTZ, and then you decide to make the entire warehouse an FTZ. Is that possible?
Absolutely. So it would be really a twofold process. One is making sure you deactivate the bonded warehouse portion. And then two is submitting a minor boundary modification, modifying your footprint of your FTZ. First step would be to deactivate the bonded warehouse portion. As many on this call probably know, a foreign trade zone and bonded warehouse can't overlap footprints. So twofold process, but it can absolutely be done.
Nice. There's another question about if a product comes in at book cost, so a higher price, and it's shipping to a customer with a debited cost or lower price, how difficult is that to report to customs? And someone had commented that you probably report it to customs when it leaves the FTZ. So any comments on that one?
Yes. So typically, from a duty perspective, that's what's important here, right? And value is also extremely important. Really, typically, we need a little bit more information to dive into this, but a lot of times, first sale value is important here, not retail value. So within a foreign trade zone, you want to report first sale value. If again, we need more information here, but if I was to make up an example, if you're purchasing goods from a manufacturer at X price, but selling them at Y price, what's important here is that the first sale price is typically much lower than what you would ever sell to an end line customer. So it sounds like in this example, there might be multiple exchanges throughout this process before it's eventually sold to an end line customer. I would recommend taking a look at that first sale value, because that should be lower than ultimately what you're selling to a customer at.
Nice. And for anyone who submitted that question, if you would like to discuss it in further detail, We have a pop-up survey after the webinar where you can request a follow-up from Mike and his team. So I definitely recommend putting your information there, so we'll know if you want to talk about it further, if that answer covered it. Okay, next question was, where are UPS FTZ zones?
Great question. So we have foreign trade zones all around the United States that we administer or that we operate. What's important here is that a foreign trade zone, again, going back to what we discussed at the very start of this conversation, of this presentation, is flexible. We don't abide by an if we build it, they will come model. We abide by what does the client need, and we can transport an FTZ there. So we can designate an FTZ as part of an implementation process wherever your operational demands are, wherever your business demands are, we can transplant an FTZ.
Nice. Okay, so next question relates to something you mentioned about the benefits of FDA products being imported into a zone. So someone asked, do you have the ability to sticker products in an FTZ to make the products FDA compliant within the FTZ?
Absolutely. Those are value-added services that are absolutely allowed within a foreign trade zone.
Awesome. Next question relates to de minimis. So question is, when using an FTZ for manufacturing and pick, pack, ship services, can the import of record still use Section 321 for the individual imports into the U.S. from the FTZ?
So de minimis and a foreign trade zone cannot coexist. That is something that has been lobbied and discussed for many, many years in Washington, D.C. Rumor has it that it is going to be a big focus for 2024, but we've heard those rumors in the past. But de minimis and a foreign trade zone cannot coexist.
Got it. Okay, someone said, can you expand on the impact of FDA and other PGAs if you're wanting to utilize an FTZ from an MPF management standpoint? I know that's a very broad question, so let's see.
Sure. So it is a broad question. So I can take it from the top. So within a foreign trade zone, you could take advantage of MPF, merchandise process fee savings, via the weekly entry process. Entry meaning withdraw from a zone entering U.S. commerce, regardless of the product. So if you have 100 shipments a month, bear with me, guys, I'm bringing up my calculator. If you have 100 inbound shipments a month that all meet the maximum value, that's $615 essentially, times 100. That's $61,000 you're going to be paying customs in a non-FTZ environment via the MPF charge. In the foreign trade zone, there's 4 weeks in that month, you're going to be paying $615 times 4, you're going to pay $2,500. So in that 1 month, you have $59,000 of savings in this example, regardless of the product, whether it's FDA approved or non-FDA approved. In a healthcare environment, if the product is non-FDA approved, it can sit within the foreign trade zone until that FDA approval is obtained. Also, at the time of admission, you don't need to communicate to customs or to the government your intent with that FDA subject product. Once it is FDA approved, it's ready for immediate distribution and can be placed on a weekly entry once it's shipped out of the zone. A weekly entry does not encumber or add any friction to your outbound shipping environment. You can ship as many times as you want, as much product as you want throughout the zone week. We are just going to systemically gather all that up virtually to put on a weekly entry. At the end of the week, send it to your broker of choice for it to be filed where duties are owed. Well, if there is duty owed, sometimes a lot of healthcare stuff is duty free, and merchandise processing fee would then be paid. Again, on that weekly entry, one payment of $615. I hope that answered the question. It's pretty broad. If it didn't, again, as Anna said, Happy to take those specific examples for your organization and provide you a detailed response.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, get in touch with us get in touch with us after the webinar. I feel like your question wasn't answered, but I thought that was a good clarification. The next question is interesting. So when establishing a manufacturing FTZ, when is duty required to be paid for the manufacturing machines that are being installed within the zone that never necessarily exit the zone?
Great question. So if you are standing up a manufacturing facility, you can, if it's a designated and activated space to begin with, you can actually get duty deferment on the machinery if you're importing it. So if you've got a facility that's designated and activated, but it has no machinery in it yet, no manufacturing machinery, you can import machinery, not pay any duties, taxes, and fees until that machinery is set up, tested, and ready to actually produce finished goods. At that point, duty would be owed on that machinery. You would put it on an entry. It would not physically leave the zone, but you would pay duty on that machinery specifically. But it can buy your organization time to not have to pay the millions of dollars, essentially, of duty, taxes, and fees on that machinery until you're actually ready to start producing goods.
Got it. Next question. Also, I think you hit on this briefly, but probably need some elaboration on 301 tariffs. So someone is asking to confirm their understanding. So if they import components from China subject to 301 tariffs and manufacture into finished goods for sale into the US with a very low scrap rate, an FTZ doesn't sound like it would significantly reduce the duty they would pay. Is that correct?
It would not get around 301. 301 is still required. However, depending on that organization's imported value and duty payment on their components currently, it may still provide the value. A finished good should have a lower duty rate in many occurrences than the components, even though you can't get around the 301. You can have MPF savings, duty deferment savings, and then if there's any eventual export there, there's potential for export savings. I know they said there was very low scrap, but really it comes down to a math problem, right? To see if the juice is worth the squeeze there. But they're absolutely right. You cannot get around the 301 in that scenario.
Got it. Yeah, that's a good distinction. Okay. Next question is, if you are a distribution warehouse, are you allowed to declare waste on consumption entry if intended for recycling from the FTZ?
That is a very specific question. So within an FTZ environment, you're not doing a consumption entry unless you elect to, right? Most of your goods should be put on a 214 and admitted to the zone. And then Anna, can you repeat the back half of that question? So they know prior to admitting the goods that they want to scrap and recycle?
That's what it sounds like.
Gotcha. So there is a distinction when it comes to scrap that Customs is very strict on. There should not be any value that is retained. So you can't donate goods, unfortunately, and use the scrap process, right? You would have to actually pay duty and remove the goods to donate them within the United States. And recycling needs, if you're true recycling means that there's some sort of value that is maintained and there's some sort of reusability there. Customs defines scrap and destruction is essentially adding it to a landfill, right? It must absolutely be destroyed. Now, there is a process where you can reduce the amount of duty owed by reporting that you're recovering less than the original value. That can absolutely be done. But if you're looking for true scrap, true destruction means no value retention, and that it's essentially being destroyed, added to a landfill, burned down, and essentially becoming nothing. So that's what the scrap and destruction process is designed for. But some companies, depending on their manufacturing nature, may scrap $200 worth, but retain $100 of that 200. You would only be liable for duty on what value retained, not the value that it's scrapped at, if that makes sense. But scrap could be very confusing, and it needs typically individual customs approval before it's complete.
Nice. Thanks, Michael. There's also a few questions about if we're going to send this presentation out. So we send the recording out to everybody. That will be automatically sent to your inbox. If you do want a copy of the actual presentation to review with your team, you can feel free to reach out to me. I put my email in the chat, and I can send a copy to you personally. But we won't mass distribute that. So please just reach out to me via an email if you want that. Okay, next question is a question that I think you'll like, Michael. So the question is, does UPS partner or become or provide resources to start an FTZ?
Oh, this is my favorite question. So UPS offers a soup to nuts turnkey foreign trade zone solution. We are a buffet. You can use us for designation, activation, notification of production authority, which means you want to manufacture, but you need Washington, D.C. approval on your manufactured goods. You can also use us for FTZ implementation. You could use us for day-to-day FTZ administration. You can use us for inbounds into or out of your foreign trade zone. You can use us for training, consulting, how to deal with customs when they walk in the door. So we have a plethora of services here at UPS. You can always reach out to myself or Jason Hicks. Our contacts are in this presentation. Anna's a great resource as well. She can absolutely get in touch with me. We're here to support you. Again, our first step is always to look at feasibility from your perspective. Itemize the FTZ savings and present to you a receipt. And that bottom line savings will allow you to decide if the juice is worth the squeeze. FTZ very quickly becomes a math problem. Hopefully that math problem provides you dollars and cents benefit. If it doesn't, we'll absolutely communicate to you, and there's no sense embarking on the journey. But if it does, we can absolutely itemize and show you what those savings are.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's sometimes like cost benefit analysis might feel simple in concept, but there's so many things to take into account. And I know Mike and Jason have a great tool to do that. So please reach out. I put Mike and Jason's contact information in the chat again. There was another question about who to reach out to about these type of opportunities. So Mike and Jason are your guys.
And I think it's also worth pointing out that while there are synergies with using UPS as a broker, as a freight forwarder, as a warehouse operator, right? The FTZ product that UPS offers can also be agnostic, right? We can work with any broker, any warehouse operator, any manufacturer, any freight forwarder. It's a plug and play solution. So again, we'd love for you to do all your business with UPS. There are synergies there, but we understand that might not be feasible for your organization. And we are very agnostic in our FTZ program.
That's a great call out. There's another question that came in, and let's see how this goes. So with an arm's length transaction from one related entity to another, can you reduce the related value if the product never enters U.S. commerce? And they ended it with hope that makes sense. So if you need elaboration, let's see.
Sure. Can you repeat the question one more time, Anna, just to make sure I've got it?
Yeah, so with arm's length transactions from one related entity to another, can you reduce the related value if the product never enters the U.S. commerce?
So can you reduce the related value? I think we need to learn a little bit more specifics behind it. Typically, an arm's length transaction means unrelated parties, right? Not related parties. But if you're looking at different entities, meaning you have, let's call it ANA International and ANA United States, related parties, both of those parties can exist within a foreign trade zone. And duty liability can be chosen for your organization. An example would be is that an international entity, let's call it Anna Garant International, she is going to admit goods into a United States foreign trade zone. Anna International owns all of those goods. When an order in a distribution center is allocated for pick, pack, and shipping, during that process, a change of ownership occurs. And the international entity essentially sells it to the United States entity. The United States entity would then be liable for filing the entry and paying duties and taxes and fees. It's a benefit. It keeps the international entity off of any United States audits and things of that nature. So that would be a related party exchange, right? In my experience, arm's length is typically discussed when it is non-related parties. But happy to take that question offline, get a little more specifics around it, and I'm confident we can get you a detailed answer.
Nice. Yeah, whoever sent that question, reach out to Mike for any additional discussion on that. There's one question that came through the Q&A that was, can any product qualify as FTZ or be brought to an FTZ?
Sorry, you're breaking up for me. Can you say it one more time?
Can any product qualify for an FTZ?
Great question. So yes, short answer is yes. Long answer is that when you're going through the implementation process, local customs is going to want to understand your FTZ intent and the product that you're going to be distributing, or at least admitting to your zone. So there are additional requirements around some products. A minor example would be sunglasses. Sunglasses are FDA attributed, right? But for some reason, customs will never allow you to put sunglasses on a weekly entry. So there are some creativity items that we need to get around something as simple as sunglasses. An extreme example would be anything that is firearms or tobacco or alcohol. Those have their own set of requirements that would have to be covered with local customs and FTZ intent. So short answer is most goods, most general goods, absolutely will qualify for a foreign trade zone. Long answer is depending on the specifics, there may be some additional steps you have to go through.
Great answer. And great question. Okay, I saw Nick sent some more details on your specific situation. So I think we might not have time to go into those details, but if it's okay with you, Nick, I think Mike and the team can get back to you on that one. There is also a question about if you can re-enter an FTZ after taken out for export under bond, but not exported.
So I think I can answer that twofold. Hopefully I got that question right. So returns are absolutely allowed within a foreign trade zone, as long as there was no intent to return. Customs doesn't like us taking advantage of maybe a lower duty rate when we know it's going to go up, right? By removing it from our zone just to do a U-turn and bring it back in domestic status, right? Maybe to get around a known increase in duty, right? So, but if there is no intent to return, send it to a customer and they decide they don't want it and they want to return it, that is absolutely allowed within a foreign trade zone. Now, if you send it domestic and it's returned, that's absolutely acceptable. It's going to come back in domestic status, and your inventory control and record keeping system, your FTZ software, will maintain that as a domestic layer. It'll ensure that you never repay duty on that product. Now, if you send something, if you export, never pay duty, and it goes to Canada, let's say, and that end destination says, yeah, you know what, I don't want this anymore. As long as you have a process put in place to re-import those goods, send them in bond, send them back to your foreign trade zone, you can absolutely readmit them in foreign status. Never have to pay duty until that particular layer is then either sent domestically, specifically to an inline customer. Hopefully that makes sense. Short answer is returns are allowed if you're returning a previously exported item, as long as you have an inbound process to capture that product, send it in bond to your FTZ, you can take advantage of that.
Nice. Great question on returns. Okay, I think we're heading towards the end, so we might have time for a couple more questions. But if there's anything else, as we said before, there will be a feedback survey that pops up after this, so you can just provide your contact details there and the team can get back to you. But this question is about duty drawback and can duty drawback coexist with an FTZ?
Uh, we don't recommend. A foreign trade zone should take the place of your duty drawback process. In a foreign trade zone, you never have to outlay those duties, taxes, and fees. You keep them in your back pocket for anything that is re-exported. In a duty drawback environment, you're paying duty up front on a consumption entry when it enters the United States. In a foreign trade zone environment, you would put that product on a 214 and admit it to your zone and never pay customs in the first place. So an FTZ should be looked at as a replacement for your duty drawback process.
Right. And by the way, if you're interested in FTZs or duty drawback, our trade advisory services can offer support with both of those. Okay, so I think this is going to be our last question. It's, do you offer any additional training on FTZs? There's a lot of positive feedback in the chat. People like the session. So where can we hear more from Mike?
Absolutely. So my team provides face-to-face, we'll fly out, come to your facility, provide FTZ 101 training. If you're looking to implement a foreign trade zone, we will provide you operational best practice training. If you're looking to keep everything in-house and administer it yourself, while I prefer you come to me and have my team do it, we are happy to come on site, train your team how to administrate, train you how to fish for yourself. We have many specific training sessions that would specifically address your day-to-day operation, whether it's import to export, import to manufacture, import to just U.S. distribute, whether or not you're in the healthcare industry, high-tech industry, automotive, manufacturing, whatever the case may be. Each of those offer their own individual complexities when it comes to foreign trade zone. My team is very well versed in all of the major industries, and we're happy to tailor specific training to your business needs.
Fantastic. All right. Well, that wraps up our webinar for today. There's a few questions about the recording, so I'll just reiterate that will be sent out probably in the next couple of days to everybody who registered. You can also find the recording on ups.com/supply chain. And if there's any other questions or you want to get in touch with Mike and his team to talk about your own FTZ needs, please reach out to him via the information that we shared earlier, or you can complete the feedback survey at the end of this webinar and the team will get in touch with you. So with that, I want to thank you all for joining today. I hope you have a wonderful day and hope to see you in a future webinar.
Thank you, everyone.